She called on a Tuesday evening from a number I did not recognize. I almost did not answer. I had developed a habit in the 6 months since everything fell apart of letting unknown numbers go to voicemail, a small protective measure against the specific vulnerability of being caught off guard by a voice I was not prepared to hear. But something made me answer. And the moment I heard her voice, broken and small, and nothing like the voice I had known for 14 years, I understood that whatever she was calling to say was going to cost her more than it cost me to hear it. Her name was Celeste. She had been my closest friend since I was 22. She had been my husband's affair partner for 8 months. And she was calling me 6 months after she had helped him destroy my marriage to tell me that the man she had left me for had done to her exactly what he had done to me. I sat in my kitchen with the phone against my ear and I listened to her cry. My name is Nneka. I was 36 years old when my husband left me for my best friend. I was 37 when she called me crying. And what I said to her in that phone call is the thing I have thought about more than anything else in the 2 years since. I need to tell you about Celeste before I tell you what she did. Because she was not a simple villain, and this was not a simple story, and if I reduce her to the role of the woman who betrayed me, I lose the part of the truth that is the most important. Celeste was the person who had shown up at my door at 2 in the morning when my mother was diagnosed. She was the person who had sat with me through the miscarriage I had not told anyone else about. She was the person whose voice I heard in my head when I was making difficult decisions, not because I was asking her, but because I had absorbed her perspective so completely over 14 years that it had become part of how I thought. She was also someone who had wanted things she had not said out loud. I understood this only after, in the careful, painful reconstruction of a friendship that I had believed I knew completely. She had wanted recognition she had not received in her own life. She had wanted the specific quality of attention that Kobe gave her when he turned it toward her. She had wanted to be chosen. She had chosen to get those things in the worst possible way. I am not excusing it. I have never excused it. But I want to tell you the whole truth rather than the comfortable version of it, because the whole truth is the only one worth telling. Kobe told me on a Friday evening in March. We had been married for 5 years. We had been together for 8. He sat across from me at our kitchen table, the table where we ate every meal, where we had made the decisions that shaped our life. And he told me with the specific directness of someone who has been rehearsing a difficult conversation for months and has finally arrived at the point where the rehearsal ends. He said he had been seeing someone. He said it had been going on for 8 months. He said he had tried to end it and could not. He said he believed he was in love with her. He did not tell me who she was that evening. I found out 3 days later when Celeste called me. She had decided she could not let me find out through other means. She said she owed me the truth directly. She said she was sorry. She said it in the voice of someone who has understood they have done something they cannot justify and is nevertheless not prepared to undo it. I remember putting the phone down on the kitchen counter while she was still speaking. Not hanging up. Just putting it down. And standing in my kitchen for a very long time while the sound of her voice continued from the speaker, and I looked at nothing and felt the specific quality of a world rearranging itself around a new and permanent truth. The weeks after Kobe left were the hardest I had navigated since my mother's diagnosis. Not because I was not functional. I was functional. I went to work. I managed the practical dismantling of a shared life. I handled the legal and financial administration of a separation with the precise, organized competence of someone who has always managed difficult things by giving them structure. But at the center of everything was a grief that had 2 layers, and I want to be honest about that because I think people assume the grief is only about the husband. It was also about Celeste. In some ways it was more about Celeste. Kobe had broken a vow. Celeste had broken something older and more fundamental, the specific trust of a woman who had believed for 14 years that she was loved by a friend who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. The kind of trust that does not come with a ceremony or a legal document, but that is somehow more binding than either. She had seen me clearly. She had chosen to use what she saw. I grieved that for longer than I grieved the marriage. I did not contact her. She sent 3 messages in the weeks after the call. I did not respond to any of them. Not from cruelty, from the honest understanding that I had nothing to say that was worth saying yet, and everything to lose from saying the wrong thing before I had arrived at the right one. My friend Yara was the one who held me together, not Celeste. Yara, a woman I had known for 7 years who had always occupied a slightly quieter place in my life than Celeste, because Celeste had always taken up more space, and I had always accommodated that without naming it as accommodation. Yara showed up on the Saturday after Kobe left with food and the specific quality of presence that does not try to fix anything. She did not tell me how I should feel or what I should do or suggest that time would make it better. She simply showed up and stayed until I told her she could go and came back the following Saturday and did it again. She was the person who asked me once, in the 3rd month, what I was going to do when Celeste eventually called back. I said, I do not know yet. She said, you will know when the time comes. I said, how? She said, because by then you will have figured out who you are without either of them. And whoever that person is will know exactly what to say. I thought about that conversation many times in the 3 months that followed. I spent those months finding out who I was without either of them. It was not a dramatic process. It was quiet and daily and sometimes very lonely, and it produced a version of me I had not met before, someone quieter than she had been, more certain of her own boundaries, less available for the management of other people's emotional weather. Yara was right. By the time the unknown number called, I knew exactly what to say. 6 months after Kobe left, I had rebuilt the architecture of my daily life almost completely. I had moved out of the house we had shared, that had been the most practically complicated part, the disentangling of a shared domestic life, but I had done it with the methodical precision I brought to everything difficult. I had found a flat I loved. A place I had chosen entirely for myself with no negotiation and no compromise and no consideration of anyone else's preferences. I had gone back to the professional work I had been deprioritizing during the marriage. I was a brand consultant, and I had a practice that had been running at partial capacity because I had been accommodating Kobe's career demands in ways I had not fully acknowledged as accommodation until they stopped. Without those accommodations, the practice ran differently, more ambitiously, on my own terms entirely. I had started therapy. Not crisis therapy, the sustained, long-term kind that is not about surviving the immediate thing, but about understanding the patterns that had produced it. My therapist was a woman named Dr. Sable who asked questions that arrived exactly where the answer was and then waited in complete silence until it came. She asked me once what I had learned about myself from the marriage. I said, I had learned to make myself smaller in increments so gradual I did not notice until I looked back and could not find the original size. She said, and now? I said, I am finding the original size again. She said, what does that feel like? I said, like the first breath after a long time of breathing shallowly. Celeste's call came on a Tuesday at 7:43 in the evening. I was in my kitchen making dinner. The phone was on the counter. The unknown number appeared in something, instinct, readiness, the specific quality of a person who has done 6 months of work and is genuinely prepared for whatever comes next, made me answer. Her voice was immediately recognizable despite being nothing like I had ever heard it. 14 years of knowing someone's voice in all its registers, happy, tired, excited, nervous, the specific way she laughed when something surprised her, meant I knew it immediately even in the register I had never heard before. Broken. She said my name. She said it the way you say someone's name when you are not certain they will respond to it, tentatively, as though the name itself is a question. I said, Celeste. She started crying immediately. Not the managed tears of someone performing emotion, but the ugly, uncontrolled crying of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally reached the point where holding it is no longer possible. I stood in my kitchen with the phone against my ear. I did not cry. I did not feel the urge to. I felt something more complicated, a mixture of the grief I had already processed and a new, unexpected thing that took me a moment to identify. Compassion. Complicated, qualified, not fully resolved compassion for a woman who had made a choice I would never forgive and was now living inside the consequences of it. If this story is hitting something real for you right now, hit subscribe. I post every day, and I do not want you to miss what comes next. She told me everything in fragments between the crying. Kobe had ended things with her 4 months after she and I had spoken. Not dramatically. In the same direct, certain tone he used for everything, a conversation over dinner where he had told her he had made a mistake. That what they had was not what he had believed it was when he had left me for it. That he needed to step back. She had not seen it coming. She had believed, with the complete sincerity of someone who had reorganized her entire life around a conviction, that what she and Kobe had was the real thing. That the 8 months of the affair had been the true version of him, and that everything that came before, including his marriage to me, had been the performance. She had been wrong. He had gone back to dating. She had heard through mutual acquaintances that he was seeing someone new, not me, someone neither of us knew. He had moved through the rupture of our marriage and the affair and the ending with Celeste with the same forward momentum he brought to everything. He had not looked back. She had been left with what she had made. A friendship she had destroyed. A relationship that had not been what she believed. A reputation in our shared social circle that had changed irrevocably. The specific, lonely consequence of a choice made in bad faith. She said, "I do not know why I am calling you. I know I do not have the right." I said, "Then why are you?" She said, "Because you are the only person who actually knows me. After everything. You are still the person who knows me best." I sat with what she had said for a long moment. She was right. That was the thing that made the call so complicated and so necessary simultaneously. 14 years of genuine closeness does not dissolve because of what happens at the end of it. The knowing is still there, the specific, detailed knowledge of another person that only accumulates over years of genuine presence and attention. She still knew me. I still knew her. What had changed was not the knowledge. What had changed was what I was willing to do with it. I said, "I am going to say something and I need you to hear it completely before you respond." She said, "Yes." I said, "What you did cost me something I cannot fully describe to you. Not just the marriage, I had already understood that the marriage had problems that preceded you. Not just the friendship, though that is the wound that has been harder to close. What it cost me was the ability to trust my own perception of the people closest to me. I had believed I knew you. I had believed I knew Kobe. I had been wrong about both in ways that required me to rebuild my entire understanding of my own judgment." She said, "I know." I said, "I do not think you fully know. Because if you had known, you could not have made the choice you made." She said, "You are right. I did not know then. I know now." I said, "What changed?" She said, "Losing both of you. And understanding that I had traded the most real thing in my life for something that was not real at all." I want to tell you what I decided in the minutes after she said that. Because the decision was not obvious, and it was not what most people expected, and I have been asked about it many times since by people who wanted a different answer. I did not take her back. Not as a friend. Not in any version of what we had been. That door was closed, and I had closed it with full understanding of what I was closing, and I did not open it. But I also did not hang up. I stayed on the phone for 47 minutes. I listened to everything she said. I said the things that needed to be said, honestly, without softening, without the performed cruelty of someone who has waited 6 months to deliver a verdict and intends to make it hurt. I said, "I forgive you." Not because what you did was forgivable in the simple sense. Because carrying it is costing me something I cannot afford to keep spending on you. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That is the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me." I said, "I know. That has always been the thing between us. The honesty." She said, "I miss it." I said, "I know. But some things cannot be rebuilt. They can only be mourned and then placed somewhere you can live alongside them." She said, "Is that what you have done?" I said, "Yes. That is exactly what I have done." I told Yara about the call the following evening. She listened without interrupting, the specific quality of listening she had always brought to things that required it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Finished." In the good sense. Like something that needed to be completed has been completed. She said, "And Celeste?" I said, I think she needed to hear what I said more than she needed anything else I could have given her. Not reconciliation. Not the friendship back. Just honesty from the person who knows her best. Yara said, "You gave her something she did not deserve." I said, "I gave myself something I needed." The fact that it also helped her is a side effect, not the intention. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "You are different from the person who sat on her kitchen floor 6 months ago." I said, "Yes. Considerably." She said, "What changed?" I thought about it honestly. I said, I stopped organizing my life around other people's emotional needs. For years, I had been the person who managed the space between what I needed and what was convenient for the people around me. The marriage. The friendship. Both of them involved a version of me that was slightly adjusted. Slightly edited. She said, "And now?" I said, "Now I am the original." Unedited. And it turns out the original is significantly more capable than the edited version. Kobe contacted me 3 months after Celeste's call. Not to reconcile, I want to be clear about that because I think the shape of this story might suggest a different ending, and the ending is not that. He contacted me because the divorce had been finalized and there was a practical matter about a shared asset that required communication. We handled it through solicitors. Efficiently. Without drama. But he sent one message directly. Outside the solicitor chain. A message I had not expected and that I read 3 times before I understood what it was. He said, "I owed you better than what I gave you. I am sorry." I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back 3 words. I said, "I know. Goodbye." And I meant both sentences equally. The apology was real. I could tell because it asked for nothing. A real apology is the one that carries no expectation of response or forgiveness or the restoration of access. He had simply needed to say it and had said it, and that was the complete picture. I received it honestly. I released it completely. I wished him nothing bad and nothing good particularly, simply the ordinary life of a person who had made significant errors and was living alongside them the way we all live alongside our significant errors. Without drama. Without my further involvement. I went back to work. The practice grew in the year after Kobe left in ways I had not anticipated and that I have thought about many times since. Not because the personal crisis produced professional inspiration in the dramatic way of stories where suffering becomes fuel. More simply than that. More practically. I had time. The time I had been spending on the management of a marriage, the accommodation, the negotiation, the constant small adjustments of a life built for 2 people with different priorities, came back to me. All of it. Returned without fanfare in the ordinary hours of days that now belonged entirely to me. I did not know what to do with it at first. The first month I kept looking for the things I was supposed to be doing for someone else and finding nothing. The second month I started filling the space with work. The third month I started filling it with the specific kind of work I had been deprioritizing, the ambitious projects, the new clients, the directions I had been moving away from because they required more of me than the adjusted version of me had available. By the end of the first year, my practice had grown by 40%. By the end of the second year, I had hired 2 people. By the end of the third year, I had a reputation in my sector that was entirely mine, built on work I had chosen, produced to the standard I had set, without accommodation or adjustment for anyone else's priorities. Celeste's call had been the full stop on one chapter. The practice was the opening sentence of the next. Dr. Sable asked me in the second year of therapy what I would say to my 36-year-old self. The one sitting in the kitchen after Kobe left with the phone on the counter and the sound of Celeste's voice coming from the speaker. I thought about it carefully. I said, I would say that the 2 people you have just lost were not who you believed they were. Not because they were performing. Both of them were genuine in significant ways. but because you had accommodated so much of yourself around them that the versions you knew were partly constructions. Constructions you had participated in by making the space they needed. She said, and what would you tell her to do with that understanding? I said, I would tell her to stop making space. To take up the full amount of her own. Not aggressively, simply completely. To stop editing the original and see what the original can do when it is given the full resources she has been redistributing to other people for years. She said, and what can the original do? I said, considerably more than the edited version ever managed. She said, are you surprised by that? I thought about the practice. The flat I had chosen alone. The Tuesday call that had lasted 47 minutes and ended something that needed ending. The way Yara had said you are different from the person who sat on her kitchen floor 6 months ago. I said, not anymore. I want to tell you what happened to Celeste because I think the full picture requires it. I know what I know through the thin, imprecise channel of mutual acquaintances who occasionally pass information without specifically intending to. I have not spoken to her since the Tuesday call. I have not sought information and I have not avoided it. She left the city. Not dramatically, she moved for a professional opportunity that was genuine and that she had been considering for some time. But the timing of the move, 8 months after the Tuesday call, told me something about what the city had come to represent for her. She started over somewhere else. A new place where neither Kobe nor I existed in the daily texture of things. Where she was not the woman who had destroyed her best friend's marriage. Where she was simply herself. The version of herself that existed before the choice she had made. I do not know if she found what she was looking for. I hope she found something honest. Not because I wished her well in the uncomplicated way, I had not arrived at uncomplicated. But because I understood, through the 47-minute phone call and the years of knowing her before it, that the thing she had been looking for when she made her choice had been real even if the method of looking for it had been entirely wrong. She had wanted to be chosen. I hope she found someone who chose her for the right reasons. That is the most honest version of what I wish for her. Yara got married in my 2nd year after Kobe left. A small ceremony. The specific kind that belongs to 2 people who have decided they want witnesses, but not an audience. She asked me to speak. I had never been asked to speak at a wedding before. At my own, I had simply stood at the front and said the vows I had written and believed completely. At the weddings of friends, I had sat in rows and been moved by other people's words. Standing up to speak about Yara and her husband Dex, I felt something I had not expected to feel in that context. Gratitude. Not performed gratitude, the real kind. For the Saturday mornings she had shown up with food. For the question about who I would be when Celeste called. For the specific quality of her friendship, which had been constant and undemonstrative and entirely genuine throughout everything. I said in my speech that the most important thing a person can do for someone in crisis is not to fix the crisis, but to stay present while it runs its course. I said that Yara had done that for me with a consistency and a lack of drama that had made it possible for me to become the person standing at this lectern rather than the person who had sat on a kitchen floor 18 months earlier. Dex cried. Yara did not. She held it together with the specific composure of someone who has decided this is not the moment for visible emotion and who has the discipline to make that decision hold. Afterward, she found me and said 2 words. She said, "Thank you." I said, "No. Thank you." The thing I think about most is the 47 minutes. Not what was said. I have already told you what was said. The quality of it. The specific quality of a conversation between 2 people who have known each other for 14 years and have done something irreparable to the relationship and are now navigating what remains. What remained was honesty, not warmth. Not the easy, familiar comfort of 14 years of genuine closeness. That was gone and I did not pretend otherwise and neither did she. But honesty remained. The specific honesty that comes from people who have known each other well enough and long enough that performance is not available as an option. She could not perform remorse to me. I knew what genuine remorse sounded like in her voice, and I could hear that this was it. I could not perform indifference to her. She knew what genuine hurt sounded like in mine, and I did not try to hide it. What we had in 47 minutes was the most honest conversation we had ever had in 14 years of friendship. And I thought about that for a long time after. About how much of the friendship had been managed rather than honest. How much of what I had believed was closeness had been two people performing the version of themselves the other expected. How the crisis had stripped all of that, and what remained was the raw, unperformed truth of two people who had genuinely known each other and had failed each other in different ways and were now accounting for it as honestly as they could. That accounting mattered. Even without reconciliation. Even with the friendship permanently closed. The accounting mattered. I am 39 now. 3 years after the Friday evening in March when Kobe sat at our kitchen table. 2.5 years after the Tuesday call from an unknown number. My practice has 18 clients. 2 employees. A reputation built entirely on work I chose and produced and presented without accommodation or adjustment. My flat is the most beautiful space I have ever lived in, not because it is large or expensive, but because every single thing in it was chosen by me for reasons that had nothing to do with anyone else's preferences. The colors. The furniture. The specific quality of morning light through the kitchen window that I had identified on the first viewing and had decided was worth every other consideration. I have a relationship. A man named Son who I met through a professional event 14 months ago and who has the specific quality I had not known to look for before. He does not require me to be smaller than I am. He asks questions because he wants to know the answers. He holds uncertainty as a natural condition rather than managing it into false certainty. He is not Kobe. He is not performing a version of himself shaped around what he thinks I want. He is simply himself. And that turns out to be enough. More than enough. I want to tell you something about the betrayal that I have not said yet. Because I think the story as I have told it might suggest that what Kobe and Celeste did was entirely destructive and produced nothing except loss. And I want to be honest rather than comfortable, so I need to tell you that this is not the full truth. What they did was destructive. The loss was real. And it also produced the most significant rearrangement of my life that anything has ever produced. The marriage had been, I understand this now with the clarity that only comes from distance, a structure I had been organizing myself inside of rather than a relationship I was inhabiting fully. I had been making the adjustments and accommodations of someone who believes that love requires the constant management of your own dimensions. That the other person's comfort is part of what you owe them, and that your own expansion is something you negotiate carefully rather than something you simply do. The betrayal ended that structure completely. And in the space it left, I found out what I was when I was not organizing myself inside something else. I was considerably larger than I had believed. I do not thank them for that. I would not thank a fire for what grows in its aftermath. But I acknowledge it honestly because the truth requires it, and because I believe the truth is always worth the cost of telling it. Son asked me once what the most important thing I had learned from the marriage was. We were in my kitchen, the one I had chosen on a Sunday morning with coffee and the specific unhurried quality of a morning that belongs entirely to the two people in it. I said, I learned that accommodation is not love. I had confused them for years. I had believed that the adjustments I was making were expressions of love when they were actually expressions of fear. Fear that if I took up my full amount of space, there would not be enough room for the other person to stay. He said, and now? I said, now I know that the people worth keeping stay because of your full size. Not despite it. He said, is that what you were looking for when you were making the adjustments? I said, I was not looking for anything specific. I was managing. There is a difference. He said, what is the difference? I said, looking for something requires you to know what you want. Managing requires only that you keep things stable. I was extraordinarily good at keeping things stable. He said, and now? I said, now I know what I want. And I do not manage around it. I simply want it and I say so. He smiled. He said, I know. That is one of the things I find most extraordinary about you. I said, it is new. Give me some credit. He laughed. The kitchen was full of morning light. I spoke to my mother about all of it eventually. Not immediately. She had known about the separation from the beginning, had known in the condensed, concerned way that mothers know things even when you have not fully told them. But the full version, the Celeste part, the Tuesday call, what I had said in 47 minutes, what those 47 minutes had produced in me, I told her that over a long dinner in my second year. She listened to everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when something had touched a place she had not expected to be touched. Then she said, "I want to tell you something I should have said years ago." I said, "Tell me." She said, "You were always too generous with the people you loved. Not in the material sense. In the self sense. You gave them more of yourself than they had earned, and you did it so quietly that nobody noticed, including you." I said, "I know that now." She said, "I watched you do it in the marriage, and I did not say anything because I did not know how to say it without seeming like a mother who is critical of her child's choices." I said, "You could have said it." She said, "I know. I am saying it now. You are better at this, at being yourself fully, than you have ever been. And you are better at it because of something terrible that happened. I wish the terrible thing had not happened. But I am grateful for the person it produced." I looked at her. I said, "So am I. Most days." She said, "Most days is enough." The practice won an industry recognition in my third year. A modest one, not the largest award available, not the kind that comes with significant financial reward or international coverage, but the kind that the people I respected most in my field took seriously. An acknowledgement from a body whose assessment I trusted that the work we were producing was the standard others should be reaching for. I received it at a small dinner. Son was there. Yara was there with Dex. My 2 employees were there. My mother was there. I gave a short speech. I said the true things rather than the polished ones. I said the recognition belonged to a version of me that had not existed 4 years earlier. I said the version of me that had existed 4 years earlier had been good at her work, but had not given it everything she had because everything she had been distributed across too many other obligations. I said, I got everything back. And I gave it to the work. And this is what the work did with it. I looked at the room. I said, the people in this room are the people who made that possible. Not by rescuing me from anything. By staying present while I figured out how to rescue myself. Yara did not cry. She had the composure of someone who has decided this is not the moment and the discipline to make that hold. She raised her glass. I raised mine. That was enough. I see Kobe occasionally. The city is not large enough for complete avoidance, and I have never sought complete avoidance. That would require more energy than I am willing to spend on someone I have genuinely released. We move in adjacent professional circles and occasionally appear at the same events. The first time we were in the same room after the divorce was finalized was at an industry event 14 months after everything ended. I knew he would be there. I had considered not going and had decided that not going was a form of management I was no longer interested in. I went. We saw each other across a room. He looked at me with the specific expression of someone who has assessed a situation and found it more complicated than they expected. I looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has nothing to manage and no performance to maintain. I gave him a small nod. He nodded back. We did not speak. We did not need to. The 3 words I had sent in response to his apology were the last words between us, and they were complete. I circulated. I spoke to the people I had come to speak to. I did the work the event was for. At one point, I looked across the room and he was watching me. Not with longing or regret or any of the things people expect. With something simpler. Recognition. The recognition of a person who has encountered someone they underestimated and is now watching them operate at full capacity in a room that belongs to them. I looked away. I kept working. Son asked me once if I was glad Kobe left. It was a direct question, and he was a direct person, and I had come to love both of those things about him. He did not manage around difficult topics. He simply asked. I thought about it honestly. I said, I am glad for what came after. Not for the cost of getting there. Those are different things, and I want to keep them separate. He said, what was the cost? I said, the specific grief of someone who built something real with another person and watched it come apart because of choices neither of them should have made. The grief of a friendship I genuinely loved. The months of rebuilding a sense of my own judgment that had been comprehensively shaken. He said, and what came after? I said, this. All of this. The practice at the size it is. The flat I chose alone. The person I discovered when I stopped organizing myself around other people's needs. You, specifically you, who I would not have been ready for before any of it happened. He said, I am glad you were ready. I said, so am I. I just wish the readying had been less expensive. He said, the most important things usually are. I said, yes. I am beginning to make peace with that. What would I say to the woman standing in her kitchen with the phone against her ear listening to her best friend's voice come from the speaker while she looks at nothing? I would say, put the phone back to your ear. Not to forgive yet. Not to negotiate or manage or find the version of this that is least damaging. Simply to listen. Because listening is the first thing and the most important thing and the thing that will serve you better than any other response available in this moment. I would say, the grief that is coming is real and it has 2 layers and both layers matter. Do not let anyone tell you the marriage is the only loss. The friendship is also a loss, and it is a different kind of loss, and it deserves its own grieving. I would say, 6 months from now an unknown number will call on a Tuesday evening. Answer it. What you say in that call will not restore what was lost. Nothing restores what was lost. But what you say will complete something that needs completing and give you back a version of yourself you did not know you had been withholding. I would say, the original version of you, the one that existed before you started making accommodations, is considerably more capable than the adjusted version you have been working with. She is waiting. She is patient. She will be there when you are ready to meet her. Meet her. She is worth the introduction. My name is Nneka. My husband left me for my best friend. She called me 6 months later crying. And everything I needed had been waiting for me in the space their leaving created. I just had to stop filling that space with other people first.